Welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 5 unique builds for 5 commanders, my new favorite series that I'm doing, where I am just coming up with unique and different builds for certain commanders, and maybe I'm not the first guy to ever come up with this idea, I don't know. Again, I'm just looking at the main way that that commander is built, and I'm saying, let's go in a different direction that maybe we haven't ever done before. So again, I think it's a great supplementation for my channel where I'm not dealing with underwhelming commanders necessarily here. I mean, again, some of them are. I would say definitely a couple I'm talking about here today would be underwhelming, but I'm also talking about some really popular ones as well. For example, the first commander I'm going to talk about today is the most popular commander in the entire format, which is Atraxa, Praetor's Voice, and of course, green, white, blue, black, flying, vigilance, death touch, lifelink, 4/4 at the beginning of your end step proliferate. Obviously, it's a great commander. It should not be a mystery why this is the most popular commander in the format. It completely makes sense. I've already gone in a different direction with this commander in the past. I actually built an Atraxa Sagas deck way back before there was all this Saga support, and of course, there wasn't any commanders that were doing it. I thought Atraxa was a neat commander there because, of course, Sagas are using counters, so proliferating does work. The idea that I had mentioned on one of my 10 deck ideas quite a while ago, which I think is actually a pretty good one. Again, I'm going in, like, what direction has no one ever gone with Atraxa before? They've done a lot, obviously, because this commander is so open-ended. You can do, I mean, typically what you see is the Super Friends, obviously. You also see the Infect a lot. You also see the +1/+1 counters. Those are probably the 3 main ones, but any counter theme works. The one that I think that I would suggest that I don't think I've ever seen anyone do, it's pretty unique. You know, if you were going to make a unique idea with Atraxa, because again, pretty much everything has been done before, I think the Voltron strategy is probably maybe not the most unique, but it's definitely a unique one that not a lot of other people are doing. Even though Voltron is not very original, with Atraxa it is. And the reason why is because we ignore the proliferate part. We have a 4/4 flying vigilance death touch lifelink creature, right? That part of Atraxa is also super fantastic. That's a really good creature, especially for 4 mana. So if I do a Voltron strategy with my Atraxa, pretty fantastic, right? I just put a sort of feast and famine on my Atraxa. Man, that's a menacing creature. Not only does it have flying and death touch, so of course, blocking it is almost guaranteed not to happen. So you're going to be getting that damage trigger from your sort of feast and famine. You're also gaining life, and your commander also has vigilance. So now you have a phenomenal blocker, right? Again, someone who's played against the Super Friends deck knows one of the reasons Atraxa makes such a phenomenal Super Friends commander is, yes, the proliferate, but also she's a really good blocker, and it's hard to get in for damage and get at those planeswalkers that they have. However, you can play into the proliferate part as well, right? There is a lot of auras out there that are putting counters on themselves. So the proliferate actually does work here, right? I'll just throw out one. Predatory Hunger, 1 green mana, aura. Throw this on your Atraxa. Whenever an opponent casts a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on enchanted creature. That's pretty fantastic in any Voltron deck, but of course, now we can proliferate those counters as well, right? Equipment as well. There's a lot of equipment out there that is dealing with counters. Here's a really interesting one from Streets of New Capenna. Gavel of the Righteous, 2 mana artifact equipment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a charge counter on Gavel of the Righteous. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. As long as it has 4 or more counters on it, equipped creature has double strike. Hey, that's pretty good with the vigilance and the death touch and the lifelink and all that, right? That's definitely something you want on your Voltron commander. And of course, those counters we can proliferate, so our commander gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we get to the 4 counters a lot quicker. And then also the equip is pay 3 or remove a counter from Gavel of the Righteous. So really easy to equip on our commander as well. So, I guess it's not super unique to be doing Voltron in commander, and it's obviously a strategy that has been maybe shied away from. I will also say one of the things that make Voltron not as good as it used to be is all of the really great removal that we've been getting in the last few years, but because you're in those 4 colors, it's really easy to protect your commander as well, right? Of course, we have all of the white and green, I make my creature hexproof indestructible stuff, the blue counter spell, so it's really easy to protect your commander here as well. I think it's a pretty neat, it's not the most unique, interesting strategy, but for an Atraxa deck, not too shabby. All right, I'm going to go in another direction here and tackle some really underwhelming ones. Menel Door, Swift Savior, and in fact, the next 2 I'm doing in a row are from Lord of the Rings, and because we got like over 100 commanders from Lord of the Rings, I will probably be talking about Lord of the Rings commanders in various videos of mine. I'll be touching on them probably in this series for sure for a long, long time. I mean, I haven't really even looked over all of them really with a fine-tooth comb. I give them a quick once over when I first see them. The fine-tooth comb look over, I haven't really done much with a lot of them. This is a commander that, again, this is going to be at the bottom of the barrel as far as the commanders from that set go. It's not super great. Okay, 3 and a blue bird soldier, 3/3 with flying. When it deals combat damage to a player, exile up to 1 target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So it's doing the blink thing, and it's doing it in mono blue. So of course, Brago is just miles better than this guy, as a lot of people will point out. It's also 4 mana. You also get to use white. Blue and white are the best blinking colors. It's doing it to a bunch of different things. So why would you ever use this guy? This guy is awful in comparison to Brago. Sure, okay. The big difference here, though, and again, I'm going in a different direction. I'm going in a unique, interesting direction. What can we do that we can't do with Brago, right? Brago says when it deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of target non-land permanents you control, then return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control. And of course, Menel Door says exile up to 1 target creature you own. That is the big difference. So that's the one thing we can do here that we cannot do with the Brago deck. I have a Gilded Drake. My Gilded Drake comes into play. Yes, I know it's an expensive card, but it is a great example here. I swap, I exchange with my opponent. I take their best creature. I attack with my Menel Door, and I don't have to attack them. You are exiling up to 1 target creature you own. So I attack someone else. I connect. I blink my Gilded Drake because it is a creature I own. Even though my opponent controls it, return it to the battlefield under my control. That's what you're doing with this deck. You are doing a mono blue exchange theme, which of course blue, lots of options there, right? So I'm going to put all the blue stuff in this deck that is doing the exchange theme. I'm going to exchange with my opponents. I cast that spell that is exchanging a creature of mine and a creature of theirs. I give them whatever. It doesn't matter what I'm giving them. I grab their best creature because whatever I give them, I'm immediately going to get back. And also, you still get the blink, right? So I have a spell seeker in play, right? I cast my spell seeker. I go get some spell out of my deck. I cast, an exchange spell. I guess you probably couldn't get an exchange spell with your spell seeker, but you know what I mean, right? I cast my Archaeomancer, whatever. You're going to put a lot of those creatures in the deck. I cast my Archaeomancer. I get that exchange spell back out of my graveyard. I cast it, exchanging my Archaeomancer for the best creature on the board. Again, I'm already coming up with a really great, and I don't know if you would call it a combo, but synergistic situation with this commander. I exchange my Archaeomancer for the best creature on the board. I connect with my commander. I blink my Archaeomancer because I own it. It comes back into play. I get that exchange spell right back out of my graveyard and repeat the process. And it is a little slow, but this is essentially, insurrection. I don't want to use insurrection, but eventually I gain control of every single creature on board. Pretty great. It's a little slow. You could put a, Stronic Resonator situation in here so that you could get more value. Obviously, you could throw Panharmonicon in the deck for more value. So you can still do the blinking thing. So I have Spellseeker, I have Archaeomancer, I have just these value-y Muldrifter, whatever, just these value-y blinking creatures that are just good in the deck anyway, and then I'm exchanging them with my opponent and then getting them back. And again, not only am I getting my creature back, I'm getting the ETB as well. I think that's a pretty darn good deck idea. Again, I've talked about this a few times recently where I already have 2 mono blue decks and I don't really want another one. There's probably at least 3 mono blue commanders from Lord of the Rings that I find to be really interesting build arounds, but don't really want another mono blue deck. I already got 2. Go after that one yourself if you like it. The other commander from Lord of the Rings that I'm going to talk about today is Lobelia, Defender of Bag End. And there was two, I believe, mono black Lobelias in this set. And this one, again, neither of them were great. There was a lot of underwhelming commanders from that set. This one's not super great, but I have an interesting way to build this commander, which, again, just like with Meneldor, maybe people are doing the exchange thing. These are both very new commanders, so I don't know. I'm basically just saying, if you want to build this commander, here's a really unique, interesting way to do it. So 2 and a black halfling citizen 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top card of each opponent's library and exile those cards face down. Tap, sacrifice an artifact. Choose one. Until end of turn, you may play a card exiled with Lobelia without paying its mana cost. That's pretty good. And this is the play, so that means lands work here, right? When it says play, that means now I can play a land from exile. All the stuff where I'm playing my opponent's stuff from exile will work here, obviously. You're going to do that anyway. Also, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Obviously, that works great as well. The problem here is there's a couple of problems. Your commander has an ETB, and like I said about the other Lobelia, how often are you going to be doing that, right? Black doesn't do the blinking thing really at all. I mean, you got the obvious ones like Conjurer's Closet, but how many options are there in colorless, right? Cold Storage is one I'll throw out there. That is a, not great, but it's an okay way to get extra ETBs off of creatures if you're in, mono black. Used to have that one in my Nadir and Miara deck for that reason. The best way, as I talked about when I did the other Lobelia as well, to get that ETB again is the slingshot effects, right? That is what black does really, really well. Black does the supernatural stamina, my creature dies, and it comes back into play, which is great already. That's someone kills my commander, supernatural stamina, I get it back. But if you have an ETB commander, you get the ETB again. However, I'm also in the sacrifice artifact theme, which, and I guess the other Lobelia works here too because it makes treasure tokens. Ruthless Technomancer, great fit in this deck, no matter what you're doing. But I thought, okay, hold on a second. We're doing that supernatural stamina thing, so we probably want sack outlets, right? I want that high market. So I can sacrifice my Lobelia, supernatural stamina, or I guess I would supernatural stamina first, then high market. I guess you could just sacrifice an artifact to drain your opponents every turn, sure, but you really want that other ability, I think. That's the interesting fun part about this. So I want to be doing that a lot, right? And I thought, okay, well, wait a minute. Why don't we kill 2 birds with 1 stone, right? Our commander's ability says sacrifice an artifact. So that means if we turn our commander into an artifact, she can sacrifice herself, right? Which I thought was a really funny idea for this deck. So of course, Liquimetal Torque, which I love that card. I probably one of my favorite mana rocks in the entire format for the simple reason that it enables really fun strategies like this. I have a Liquimetal Torque. I turn my commander into an artifact, and then I use the ability on herself, obviously using the supernatural stamina, right? Now, those slingshot effects work with my commander when she sacrifices to her own ability. Janky, funny thing. Again, maybe people are already doing this. I don't know. I Liquimetal Torque my commander. I supernatural stamina, sacrifice to its own ability. It comes back into play. I get that ETB. And again, you can just do sacrifice an artifact. And I would probably put a Liquimetal Torque in the deck anyway, because I can turn my land into, well, I guess you can't land with Liquimetal Torque. You can with Liquimetal Coating. Again, I'm not building around one card. There are other options here. There's a fair amount of options. You would be surprised, because I have gone to the well with this idea from time to time where I am turning stuff into artifacts for various reasons, right? So Liquimetal Torque, Liquimetal Coating, Ashnod's Transmogrant is a funny old one that you can use here, which will work. That'll turn your commander into an artifact creature, and then you can sacrifice it, right? There actually is a decent amount. Thran Forge, I think, is another one that will work here. Repeatable option for turning stuff into artifacts. And I think that's pretty good value. Again, all that stuff that is turning stuff into artifacts does work with your commander because you are sacrificing artifacts. But I like turning my commander into artifact because I want that ETB again, right? Each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. That's okay. But until end of turn, you may play a card exiled with Lobelia without paying its mana cost. That's really good. You could get some real bangers off the top of your opponent's libraries, right? I want to use that ability more than just once. I want to use it a bunch. So the idea for the deck here is, again, I probably would be going in the direction of I put the Liquimetal Torque, Liquimetal Coating in my deck anyway. So I'm turning my commander into an artifact. I'm going to use the supernatural stamina, or again, there's lots of options there as well. Lifeline is another one. Powerful old card, kind of expensive, but again, that's a way to guarantee get your commander back into the, I just talked about this with the Sharky deck, actually, which is funny. The Sharky Evolving Wild scenario was very similar there, where Lifeline worked and I was sacrificing my commander over and over again. And you can get into some pretty neat shenanigans there, but that's the deck. The deck is I turn my commander into an artifact and sacrifice it to its own ability. Speaking of which, Mazzy True Sword Paladin. Now we're going in the other direction. Of course, Mazzy, I just think is a great commander, and I really am surprised it's not more popular. It's kind of popular. There's just a lot of great things going on here, and I'm not going to harp on it because I've already talked about this commander a lot. Again, the enchanted creature attacks means you can cast stuff on your opponent's creatures and they will get +2/+0 and trample when they attack one of your opponents. So you don't even have to cast stuff on your creatures. Whenever an aura you control is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, exile it until end of your next turn. You may cast that card. So again, I'll just throw out ideas I've already had, which is, like, because there's so many. I cast auras on my opponent's creatures. Idea number one. Curses is another one, right? I know we already have a curse commander, but if we want to do Naya curses, now you can do it because curses are auras. And again, one of the drawbacks of auras is, I put them all on one guy, and if that guy dies, now they go away and I can't target someone else. Or I target a guy originally with that curse, and then he kind of is getting hammered on, and I actually want to use that curse on someone else. Here, now I can sacrifice that curse or get rid of it. Of course, it's an aura you control being put into your graveyard from the battlefield, so you're going to exile it, and until your next turn, you may cast that card. So now I can cast it and put it on someone else. So you could do a Naya aura theme here as well, which I've talked about. The theme I like the best here, though, is the sacrifice enchantment theme. And unfortunately, there actually is less support than there is with, if you're looking at sacrifice artifact, there's tons. There's lots of ways to turn stuff into artifacts, okay? You could do all these ideas in this deck. I think you could make such an interesting Mazzy deck. So you could do the curse thing, you could do the enchant my opponent's creature thing, but you could also do a sacrifice enchantment thing, which there's not a ton of support there, unfortunately. I'll just say, first of all, Faith Healer would be the one that is the obvious one that, again, I think you could put in any Mazzy deck. So I am sacrificing those auras to gain life so that I can recast them, right? There are also auras that sacrifice, like Capuchin Standard, I believe, like the stuff like that, where I'm sacrificing it anyway to draw a card, then I get it back, then I recast it again. So it's just cantripping, essentially, right? Doing that over and over again. There is also one of my favorite old cards, Soul Sculptor. This is one of the only ways to turn something into an enchantment, right? 2 and a white, human 1/1. Pay 1 and a white and tap target creature becomes an enchantment and loses all abilities until a player casts a creature spell. Such a funny, unique card. There's a lot of great ways to use this. And again, we're not, this doesn't work with our commander, right? It's not going to turn anything into an aura. It just turns a creature into an enchantment. And there's a lot of ways you can use this where you can just shut off your opponent's Blightsteel Colossus temporarily or Vorinclex temporarily or something. It's a great card in a commander game. In this deck, though, because we have those Faith Healer sacrifice enchantment things, right? It just works with the deck because now I can turn a creature into an enchantment, sacrifice it to gain life, right? So it just fits the theme of what we're doing already. So you're combining a lot of these themes, I guess. You could go with some of these, you can go with all these. And then on top of all of that, we are casting things from exile. And again, I don't know if people are doing this or not, okay? I will just say, I think that the cast from exile is a great fit in a Mazzy deck, no matter what direction you're going. If I'm just doing I'm putting auras on my own creatures, right? Anything that says cast from exile or you're not casting it from your hand, right? So we're doing all that stuff. Again, this is not just I'm giving you this one specific idea. It's more, I'm giving you a whole bunch of ideas where I'm doing the sacrifice enchantment theme. I'm doing the, curse theme. You could do just curses or you could combine it with everything else. I think it does all work together. Remember, your commander just says whenever an aura. So doesn't mean you have to use creature auras here, right? So go down that road, looking at other auras that enchant other things, sacrificing enchantments, and then also casting stuff from exile, sort of all of that combined. All right, and lastly today, I'm going to talk about Taigam Ojutai Master. 2 white and a blue, human monk, 3/4, instant sorcery and dragon spells. You control can't be countered by spells or abilities. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, if Taigam Ojutai Master attacked this turn, that spell gains rebound. So every single Taigam Ojutai Master deck I have ever played against, which back in the day, I used to be a lot. I never see this commander anymore. This is certainly one. When C17 came out, this guy was played quite a bit. I never see it anymore. It certainly lost popularity. It was a Voltron deck, right? And it was always the like Shadow Rift, right? It was sort of Feather before Feather was a deck, right? That's sort of how this deck was played. It was played like a Feather deck, where I have all of those little cantrippy, I give my commander flying or whatever, and then also I get the cantrip. So I cast it on my commander. My commander then attacks, right? Because of course, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, if your commander attacked, you get the rebound, so you have to attack with it. So that sort of fit. It fit with, I'm attacking with my commander anyway, I give it evasion, I can get in for damage, and of course, it's not a great Voltron commander, but you could eventually get there. And then I get the card draw, and of course I get the rebound, so then I could do it again next turn. It was just good value. It was really essentially a Feather deck before Feather came along. And I don't know if a lot of people maybe switched to Feather, and that's why Taigam lost a lot of its popularity. Again, this is a situation where everybody was concentrating on that last ability and kind of ignoring the first ability. Instant sorcery and dragon spells you control can't be countered by spells or abilities. Of course, that's just a great thing to have. And I don't know if anyone does the dragon tribal here. I doubt it. There might be some people that do. There's a couple dragons that would work in the deck. Certainly, you could certainly throw some dragons in here. There are some good ones that are just good in any deck. But having it so that your instant and sorceries can't be countered is a really powerful ability that you could certainly build around. And maybe some people have done this. I don't know. But I think it's a build-aroundable ability. And of course, you have to rely on your opponents to try and counter your stuff. No. You will counter your own stuff, right? That's the direction we're going in here. I just talked about Dovescape in my wacky multicolored enchantments video a few weeks ago. This is a slam dunk in this deck. I don't know how often people are putting this in their Taigam decks. I've never seen it myself. Again, the Taigam decks I used to play against were all Voltron strategies. That's what I'm used to people doing with that deck. And I just don't see it anymore at all. So are people doing this? I don't know, right? It's a very powerful ability. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, counter that spell. That player creates X 1/1 white and blue bird creature tokens with flying, where X is the spell's mana value. And of course, your instants and sorceries can't be countered. Now, of course, your artifacts still can, your enchantments. Obviously, this deck is going to be filled with instants and sorceries. And here, everyone else's stuff is going to be countered and yours isn't, right? That's what we want. We want these universal effects that are going to affect everybody. And we're taking advantage of it, right? And on top of that, you still get the birds, right? If I cast a 4-mana sorcery, that is a non-creature spell, this is going to try and counter it, and my commander says, nah, that can't be countered. However, then that player creates X 1/1 bird tokens with flying, so we're still getting the birds. And that would probably be your win con in this deck. I mean, this could be the win con. I think a really funny fit here with Dovescape is Crafty Cut Purse, because when your opponent casts their big non-creature spell and they're thinking they're going to get a bunch of birds, in comes your Crafty Cut Purse and you get all the birds instead. There's a lot of neat things you could do here, but we're not just building around this card, right? There's a lot of these universal effects that are going to counter everybody's stuff. And again, looking at these cards, you're going to go, oh, that's not very fun, right? There is some not fun stacksy. I don't know if stacks is the right word here, but certainly that kind of stuff, like Chalice of the Void, right? And again, people look at these cards and they go, oh, that doesn't seem very fun. When Chalice of the Void enters the battlefield, you put X charge counters on it. When a player casts a spell with that mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, counter that spell. We need that wording, by the way. If you have something that says this spell can't be cast, that's not going to work. It has to say counter that spell. So I probably in this deck would name like 1 with Chalice of the Void. There's a lot of really powerful instants and sorceries at 1 mana, particularly removal. And I can cast my paths and my swords, no problem, because they can't be countered. Another really fun, interesting one here is Ice Cave. 3 blue enchantment. Whenever a player casts a spell, any other player may pay that spell's mana cost. If a player does, counter that spell. This is a lot funner of a version than the Chalice of the Void. It is a universal sort of a countering effect that sort of affects everybody, but of course isn't going to affect you. I will point out, mana cost includes color. So what's going to happen here is if my opponents, and everyone's going to be using this on each other, but of course it's not going to affect you. If I cast a swords, my opponents can say, oh, well, I'll pay 1 white mana, right? Because you have to pay that spell's mana value to counter it. So they pay the 1 white mana. oh, wait a minute, my instants and sorceries can't be countered, so it doesn't do anything. But my opponent casts the swords on my commander, now I can pay the 1 white mana and counter their swords, right? So it's advantage me. So that's essentially the idea of their deck. And again, just like with the Mazzy deck, or maybe a lot of these decks, there's other things you can do, right? You don't have to just focus completely on this one thing. Meneldor, I can do the blinking and then also do the exchange. Here, I can do the counter everyone's stuff, but also maybe the rebound I can do as well, right? I can do the Voltron strat. I can do all that as well, but there's a whole bunch of these really neat cards that is going to give you a huge advantage. And also, I mean, honestly, I think Ice Cave is kind of a funny card to see in a Commander game. A lot of people might not like it. I think it's kind of interesting. You can do that stuff as well. So that's just an interesting way to go with a Taigam deck that isn't just straight up the Voltron strategy. And of course, I should also mention, as I typically do, I end up usually making at least one of these decks from each video. Funny enough, from the last video, I already made the Minion Carl deck, right? Borborygmos and Fblthp, which I made a separate video about because, man, I'm really in love with that deck. But I also, from the last video, made the Tocasia deck as well. So the Tocasia tapping theme. So I will post that one in the description below. Feel free to check it out for yourself. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.